everyone, and welcome to one of my favorite presentations. I love discussing language. My early days in research and learning was all about language development. So I'm really excited to share thoughts. I want to hear your thoughts on formal and informal language as it relates to disability. Okay, welcome again. Really enjoying seeing everyone here and getting a variety of ideas like the flowers. So we're in module 2 now, which is language. Module 1 was foundations. And so we hope to apply that now to unit 2 in the concept of language. So much of who we are and what we do is language. So if you think about how we express and share, how we learn, language is a huge part of that process. Not always, but a huge part. It's not all of it, but it's huge. So it's really worth diving into and think about how disability is represented in language. So thinking about culture, we think about how language is expressed, our word choices, how we receive information through different kinds of culture that's embedded in our activities. So it's in what we read, for example. Most of the time, there's a lot of language involved when we're reading books, right? Sometimes there's pictures, which is emphasizing generally language, but it's still there. Our culture, what's happening, what we learn through reading, language is mediating that. It's mediating how we share ideas and concepts. Music or performances, art are also parts of language. They include parts of language. So if you think about lyrics in a song, if you really think about the music and as it's, the lyrics to express the music, they're gonna align. So they're gonna express what we feel and what we are sharing about. So when we think about language within culture, now I want to really emphasize that concept of language, specifically the differences between formal and informal language. So think about language and status. Think about how we view language, the role of language, the person's role, and how they use language to express themselves. So, for example, academic language, which you are all very familiar, it has a specific way of expressing an idea or a concept. Typically, that language is more formal or more technical. Very specific word choices that are used in science, for example. Language is not going to look the same as it does in everyday life. So Latin words, for example, may come up more often within science, in science vocabulary. So that's one example of formal language, academic settings. Informal language can be more about just everyday language, how we express ourselves to friends, more informal environments with our peers outside of the classroom, outside of work. We may use slang. That's one specific kind or one example of informal language. So when you think about how different generations have their different slang, for example, if maybe you say lit. In my generation, we didn't grow up with the word lit, but many people will apply that concept, that word, for specific slang purposes. And it doesn't relate to a light. So lit, more, which as you know, I don't, because it isn't my generation, I'm not going to try to explain it to you, but it is a specific example of how we use slang. So again, formal language versus informal language. And we want to think about specifically how it relates to disability. So for disability, typically it's more medical. So if you think about medical language, the medical language model, diagnoses or characteristics that are really more abstract, not necessarily very personal or on an individual level, more about what you might find in a book, for example, medical books, descriptions and terminology about what disability looks like. That can include very technical language, medical, technical, clinical language, that type of thing. So an example, well, let's talk about the ableism definition. You remember the concept of ableism. Here's an example of how formal language about what that concept might look like. So talking about like a historical timeline, 1800s, is more about statistics, for example. People earned about, folks with disabilities earn about $1,000 less than those without. So we're talking about facts, very general. It's not related to someone's personal story. It's abstract, it's factual, not a personal experience. So a basic definition here. So informal language, it's more familiar. It's about your everyday experience and how we use language. So friends, family, outside of any formal academic, school, workplace type setting. Personal stories are embedded in informal language for sure. Our word choice is more about relationship development, wanting to connect with people. So if you think about social media, that is typically heavy with informal language because it's not my job generally. And so we want to kind of hook people. We want people to be drawn to that message. And it shouldn't feel like we're reading a book with formal language. So it's about more personal engagement. It's about my relationship with you, the writer. So two examples here. One is informal language with a picture. It's more visual. It's language plus. So it's not dry. It's very visual. It's colorful, yellow. We have a wolf. So there's an animal featured. We have slang, for example. So it's having a disability is only playing life in hard mode. So hard mode, that phrase, that's slang, right? That's not formal language at all. So it's something that's culturally embedded language. Second example here, I have several little diagrams here. One looks like a little award ribbon that you might give to someone. The second one says, kind of just functioning. And then it says, go you. So it makes you feel better about yourself. So it's relatable. It comments on everyday life with a disability. So keeping it real, just really keeping it real. So making sure the person is receiving the information that the writer's presenting in a very authentic way. I got you. I understand. You know, it's okay. Not everything has to be okay. It's okay to not be okay. So hopefully you can kind of see the difference between an ableism definition that you saw previously, more formal, and then these examples of informal language and kind of the characteristics between the two. So empowerment. I'm using this slide of power chords. So thinking about how we have power and we use that to empower. How can language build on people with disabilities, or maybe diminish feelings about people with disabilities? So power is a really important part of understanding the impact of language, specifically on people with disabilities. So power includes, on the left, on the orange side of the slide, it talks about control, controlling the narrative, controlling the story and the message that is presented, that's out there, how to disrupt the narrative if something is not appropriate or fair or good for folks with disability. How do we disrupt that narrative using language? Advocacy. Often, how we use language, both formal and informal language, that's power in advocating for equality. So shifting who has the power. So if we want to move the power to folks with disabilities, we use advocacy. So the opposite, we can talk about judgment. Language can be judgment. It's going to be negative about folks with disabilities. Someone who is looking down on someone that doesn't believe a person with disabilities, or just has a general negative attitude of you can't do something because you have a disability or a mental health challenge. So that being the message. Another negative one is about making decisions for people without their approval. So just that taking away of their power, the opposite of empowering someone, using language to do that. So you see that sometimes in a doctor's office, for example. If you go into the doctor's office, maybe with someone who is an adult, the person without the disability is generally talking for the person with the disability, making decisions on their behalf. It's a making decisions for yourself is a big part of growing up. It's a big part of living. So transitioning from high school, teenage years into adulthood and work and home life, it's been a big issue in the past, and it is persistent. People with disabilities um, need to be able to have the power to make decisions for themselves and know how to manage their disability, their medications, their treatments, and so forth. The last example here is working the system. So a lot of it's about a systemic access, accommodations, potentially access to work opportunities, funding, scholarships, just money, financial issues more generally, um, home life, just thinking about how the system relates to disability. So using language, knowing how to mediate, how to use that power to achieve a goal. That's not easy for anyone, and especially those with disabilities within that system that we have. So you have power and action on the left, and on the right, that's resources, documents, writings, the processes. So language being represented through those mediums. Some, again, are informal or formal, but it's labels, it's definitions, it's rules, it's criteria. Just the words that are used are really important. So a specific diagnosis from a doctor falls into that, and that's a specific criteria. As far as laws go, we talk about the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, and that's a very important law. With budget cuts, you're seeing the government cutting budgets right now, and that's going to impact what is available for support for those with disabilities. And also if they have accommodations, it's going to impact hiring processes. If they can use technology for their access or not. So it's an important budget issue. And legal classes, it's all very important. Another thing that we think about within an informal language is the awareness of marketing, unique things. So you see a lot within social media, Instagram, Facebook back in the day, maybe. People want to support the disability community through awareness and their unique challenges. So they do that through storytelling on social media. And it's relatable and it's personal. And it's making sure that people are realizing impacts on individuals. So word choice is really important there, specifically because do we want to inspire? Or do we want people to say, oh, no, that's not okay? So, or is it a call to action? So, how you frame those posts can, you want to represent a challenge, an impact, or call to action, but word choice is very important. The language we use there is very important. Here at UT, we see in education, how do we see disability represented in our community? We have the Disability Culture Center, which is really important because it represents a community. It shows what the disability community looks like. The next one I'm going to go into a little bit more in depth, and it's about jokes and humor and entertainment and how um, we perform and represent one another. Maybe maybe it's informal. It's sitting around a table with friends, chatting, and someone makes a joke that uses a word about disability or a disabled person, maybe making fun of them or of themselves, maybe. For example, we'll see many people still say, oh, I'm OCD. I'm so OCD, you know? And what does that mean? And trying to kind of bring the attention to yourself through that joke. So we'll see a lot of that sort of comedic language choice. And so we want to take a look at that. So the last example here on the list is about research and writing. So you're still in school, you're still learning how to make sense of all of this information, how to apply these ideas. And your decisions about language are a big part of how you accomplish your goals, of how you unpack and understand disability. So thinking about what words you choose to use and how you make your goals within maybe papers or discussions with peers. And if you've noticed maybe the difference between using formal and informal language between those two things and those different settings, because we are both writing research papers and we are having discussions. And so there are different levels of formal language as well. And some language is more formal than others. So language use varies greatly. It's a lot. So I want you to think about, since you watched, I want you to take a moment and think about where you have power, both in formal and informal language. And you do have power. You have a lot of power. Everyone influences others through language. So I want you to think about your opportunities for use of formal and informal language as it relates to disability. So think about where your power is. Jot down some ideas on paper or electronically, use your phone. But take a moment, jot down some ideas about where your power lies. I want you to think about that for yourself. So that language use is generally within a community, it's with other people. So we have kind of internal messages that are important, remember that. But most of the time, language is happening between people. So how we use language is how we build our community. So thinking about for your specific community, maybe you have sports team that is your community. Maybe you have a degree program. Maybe your hometown where you grew up is your community. So maybe you're involved in service organizations. Think about how your language in those different settings relates to disability. How does it show up in those different settings? How do we build culture? How do people relate to disability within those different communities? So exploring further in small group and on discussion board. So we'll use today's content. I want to have a more in-depth discussion about formal and informal language. Thanks so much.